So, I'm Rick Vosper, and I introduced myself to this group last night, so I'm the same person I was then. But I do a monthly column for Bicycle Retailer magazine, and I've been in the bike business for about 40 years, been director of marketing for Specialized and Cervelo and a bunch of other companies. So why don't we have the panelists introduce themselves?
I'm Michael Marckx. I'm founder and CEO of Monuments of Cycling, probably best known for the Belgian Waffle Ride series. I've been a marketing executive with companies like Adidas and Billabong, and have run lots of action sports brands, but I was always an avid cyclist. Did my first road race when I was 12, and have continued to have that be a part of my existence. Fortunately, in the last 10 or 12 years, I've really got to focus on the cycling industry, having run some eyewear brands that you probably know of, and then I've worked with Factor and Canyon. I spend most of my time proliferating Belgian waffle rides around the world, so we're gonna be moving to Europe and some other places in the next couple of years. So I spend my time working with brands to tell their story through the prism of the Belgian waffle ride, which also is a brand in itself. So branding is kind of my thing, and I love riding bikes like you guys.
Andrew, why don't you go?
My name is Andrew Gibbs-Dabney. I actually live here in Bentonville. My commute to this event was about a mile from right over there. I'm the founder and CEO of LIVSN Designs. We are sustainable outdoor apparel. The point of everything we make is to make it as durable, versatile, long-lasting as possible so that you can own a little bit more slimmed-down wardrobe that does more. My background actually is coming from another local startup or apparel company called Fayetteville out of Fayetteville. It's where I learned the industry a little bit, learned a little bit about branding, definitely learned a lot of what to do and also what not to do. And LIVSN is building on that experience and trying to build something a lot more worldwide and meaningful. And my whole goal is to end up at the end with something that I'm very proud of having built.
Hi, my name's Mark Sperling. I'm the co-founder of a networking organization called Group Y. We kind of focus around youth culture and youth marketing. We also produce talks at like major festivals like Coachella, Complex Con, NBA Con, and things along those side of things. And then, so it's my background, I come from the kind of action sports entertainment side of things. So starting off at Transworld Media back in the day and working for a number of titles and publications and different brands. And then over the years working with Lollapalooza, Warped Tour, things along those lines. And then overseeing partnerships for Live Nation and Red Bull. And what else was there? I don't know, some other things. My background in the cycling industry is working for a number of different brands in the space. Started a thing called Girls Learn to Ride, where we taught women and girls of all ages how to do a number of different sports, including mountain biking. And we taught over about 100,000 women throughout the year. And then also being the team manager for Dave Mira, Ryan Nyquist, and the BMX side of things. And then also global marketing director for Troy Lee Designs at the time. And the last tidbit is I own the trademark to the word authenticity, which Zap loves to hear. That's why I'm on the panel.
I want to hear about when we need to pay you royalties.
Not yet, but there will be no cease and desist. Don't worry about that.
So the title of this talk is Authenticity and Branding. And I did a little research with Mark's help and I found that 86% of Americans say that authenticity is a major factor in deciding what brands they like or will support. And among millennials, it goes up to 90%. And Mark also has a little thing called authenticity.co with the Authenticity 500 Index. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Mark. How many bike companies are in the Authenticity 500?
I mean, I know you looked it up. What, 3, I think, was on there?
Not very darn many. So Rafa is number 35 on the Authenticity Index. Peloton is number 197. Canyon is number 215. Santa Cruz, and it's probably Santa Cruz, the skateboard company. I don't know if it's the bike company. They're on there. Specialized is number 274. Bell Helmets is 310, and Pedigo is 438. So that's barely half a dozen bike companies on the top 500 most authentic brands list. So I would propose to the audience that we have an authenticity deficit in the bike business. And to start things off, I'm going to ask you guys to give us your personal definition of what makes brand authentic. And why don't we start with you, Michael?
I think we can all relate to this from a personal point of view is what is authentic to us? What are the things that we hold most dear? Maybe we grew up in a church and that helped define how we conducted ourselves. But authenticity for a brand has to do with what's the reason for being? Why does this brand exist? It's not to sell more widgets or more wheels or more pedals, but it's supposed to be imparting or providing the world with some essence or essential thing that no one else does. And authenticity comes from the people that started or founded that institution living up to this dream that they share with other stakeholders, and everyone lives up to that vision, the mission that gets them to that vision, and ultimately the core values that deliver them to their vision of what the world should look like when they've achieved everything that's authentic to their brand proposition.
Well, there you go. Andrew, you want to have a whack at it?
Sorry.
No, you did great. What he said. No, I do. I want to expand on that. So the why behind a brand, the why you exist, what you said, what you're there to put out in the world. I think it's that, and that's not just, we're here to make money. We're here to sell bikes. We're here to sell apparel. It's why we're doing it. What is different about our point of view that's going to bring something valuable? And I think the way that I'll build on what was said before is that it's the pairing of that why, that meaningful brand message, that core emotional connection with a product that actually does solve a need, right? Because no one's really interested in hearing about the next great brand. People don't buy products because of the brand. Usually they can, mainly just t-shirts or fashion maybe. But in cycling specifically, I'm a mountain biker. It's probably the reason why I was invited here. And our clothes have some mountain biking angle to it, but you're not going to buy it because of a flashy brand, or you're not going to stick with it because of a flashy brand. You're going to buy it because that bike is better than the rest. That pedal is better than the rest for you. And so I think the real power of brand is when you combine a real, true, meaningful why and a reason for being in the world with a product that can actually stand up on its own as well, that doesn't need the brand to carry it. You add those two things together and you get something that's actually special and something that's very valuable and something that doesn't get stuck in the middle. It rises to the top.
And Mark?
Yeah, so
You got
definitely this has been a subject that's been fascinating me for a number of years, especially from the different industries and spaces I've been in. It is very subjective, which I found out over the years. A lot of you'll see there's a QR code on your table there, and that's, if you have a moment, take the time to fill it out. From that, we've taken all this data. We've had over about 10,000 plus responses from all over the world, and asking, one of the questions was, what does authenticity mean to you, and what makes you authentic? And over that time, we found very common themes. Everybody had a little bit of a different answer, but the common themes were anything from real, being original, truth, honest, genuine, integrity, and transparency. And so, and we saw this too when we were asking people about what they thought brands were authentic. And that same exact themes resonated on each of those. And everybody had a specific example or reason why a brand was authentic for that particular thing. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of them over time, over this conversation, but each of them has their own uniqueness when it comes to that. There's certain brands that resonate up to the top, and then there's others that are, as you mentioned, are kind of near the bottom. And a lot of them would look at it and go, well, how is this possible when we're like the category leader on sales, but yet we're ranking very low to our consumers, considered as authentic? And so as we go into this, we'll talk a little bit more about all that.
great. That gives an excellent transition into our next topic, which is what authenticity looks like and sees in a brand. And Andrew, why don't we start with you, since you've got a brand and you are presumably trying to make it authentic. How does that look to you?
I'll try not to be a marketing angle to y'all for my own company here. I will start there. You know, I think it's we're at an advantage at the size. We're 5 years old. I started the company based on a set of values, principles, and even design principles that go into our product. And so one thing that as I've grown from just me designing to a team and a whole marketing team with a PR agency and a marketing agency, right, is you go into those relationships and say, look, we're not going to go chase the flashiest thing. I need you to work within these guidelines that say, look, we're not going to use all caps. Well, we're not going to say we're the best in the world. We're going to say why we are the way we are. We're going to say why our products deserve to exist, and we're going to talk about those principles that led us up to that point. So, you know, along with colors and fonts and all the things that go into visual brand that help to, as we scale and grow from a small business to a medium size to ideally a very large business, we don't end up looking a lot different than what was originally intended to. Different's not the right word. An evolution of that, not necessarily a divergence from it. And I would say from the bike industry, there's brands that, you know, probably well known in this audience that are the #1 global leader in sales, but no one really knows what they are because their team's so big, their market, their market nimbleness is kind of large actually because they can make a product line for every single use case. And so when you do that, there's an inherent risk of saying, what are you? Where there's smaller brands, other ones that I'd name, more niche, they're bigger now, but like Transition and Santa Cruz and Ibis, and where they don't make every bike for every person. They make their bikes in the way that they make bikes. They pedal a certain way, they use certain technology, they're built for a certain use case, and you know if you're buying into that bike, what it's gonna generally ride like. You can connect the why and the philosophy to the actual physical product and how it's gonna work. And that applies to lots of different areas of the cycling industry, I think.
Great definition and great example. What about you, Mark? Why don't you take a run at this?
Yeah, so we had this little thing we talked about on a call. So when I've gone to a number of conferences and events, or I've talked to a number of CEOs and such like that, first thing first, when I go to conferences and people get up on stage and they use the word authenticity, it's like a buzzword. We've turned it into a drinking game. It's one of those things where it's like, as many times as they say authenticity in their talk, we'll just have the imaginary drinking. So if you want to do that today, please go right ahead. But in speaking with a lot of like Fortune 500 companies, some of the household brands, I talked to their CEOs, CMOs. First thing out of their mouth was, we have spent millions, hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars to try to be connected to our audience or to our consumer, yet we constantly fail. And I've had the good fortune of working with some of those brands that have had that connection to their consumers and audience, and they would, each of these different each of the different executives I would talk to would sit there and go like, can we be like your brand, or how can we be like X, and they think that they can buy their way into that, and it's not like that at all. You mentioned we have this thing called the Authenticity 500. It's kind of like a brand index, and that's based on the responses that people have given us. And at the top, there's like 10 brands that are like night and day compared to the rest of the brands on there. And you can probably imagine who they are. It's Patagonia, Nike, Vans, a number of other brands that are like that. And we've seen commonality. The reason why a lot of them are like that is from their founders. A lot of times they had that one founder that had that kind of values and ethos of what it is, and then it just resonated down throughout the entire company. And in all their messaging, branding, products, show that core value of who they are. And so the brands that are kind of down in the lower part of that list, they don't have that. They are disconnected internally. They constantly change their messaging depending on what's the flavor of the month, kind of a thing. We were talking about DEI yesterday or at our table, and you see brands constantly like pivot to doing that just because that's what's going on in the zeitgeist of what's happening out there right now. So you have to really understand that. And we kind of dive deeper into that, like on our website, and we talk about each of these different brands and why they kind of stick out more so than others.
Great answer. And Michael, we'll give you a chance.
Yeah. These things bring up probably the most interesting thing that I've spent the last 30 years dealing with, I get hired to turn around brands. So it's either, hey, Michael, will you write us a prescription because we're ailing and we want to fix ourselves? Or will you write that and then will you execute on it? So I've turned around magazines and eyewear companies and bike brands and apparel companies and shoe companies. But the process is you go in, you do an audit, and I hope this is a good takeaway for everybody that has a shop or their own personal brand or the company, is do an audit of ask people what the vision of the company is. And if you interview 100 people and you get 100 answers, you know you're in deep yogurt. When there's a commonality to that answer, you know that the brand's been nurtured well. What typically happens is a founder starts a company, it's a great idea, it has its own reason for being, they know what the why is, then it grows, it scales, and then all of a sudden they've lost the essence or the ethos. And a good idea is chasing this or that, and then there's this disparateness to the brand. We had one example was, here's this eyewear company that came out, did a really great job of presenting their brand in a crowded marketplace and resonated. But over time, what happens is the really cool glasses get turned into an ugly black wrap sunglass for men because that's the one that sold the most. So the sales guys are saying, no, we need more ugly black wrap sunglasses for men rather than the things that were innovative or an essential part of the brand's extension and product. And then all of a sudden, they're suffering because they lost way because they were chasing dollars that weren't in accord with the vision of that company. Then I get hired to come in and turn it around. Inevitably, I go back to the founder, even if they've left 20 years earlier, and ask them, why did you do this? What was the reason for being? And then basically, you resuscitate the brand by bringing it back to what it was originally. So the takeaway, I hope, is go back to your company, your constituents, your stakeholders, and ask, do we have a brand Bible? And the brand Bible has everything from vision, which is what does heaven look like to us? The mission, which is how they get to that heaven. The core values, the things that they cling to on the way to that version of heaven. And then the fonts and the colorway and the imagery and the personality and everything that is a part of a brand that you cling to no matter what. So everything that you do, every product launch vibes with that. The takeaway is most companies lose. They either don't have a brand Bible, which is fascinating to me, or they don't know who they are, so they're chasing things. They're rudderless, and particularly now where things are so crazy and chaotic, you really have to have a rudder. So I would say, if you're thinking about any of this at all, the most important thing is, who are we? What are we doing here? What do we want to achieve, and how are we going to get there? What are the guardrails? That all comes from a brand Bible.
I want to add one thing to that. There's something someone told me one time, and it's an interesting thought because you need to control your brand. You need to know what it is and have that brand Bible. But he told me one time, you don't actually get to control your brand. You control your marketing. Your brand is what you get back. And so the trick is how close, when you ask somebody what is your brand, how close it is to what you say it is. Because they control what your brand is.
Yeah, your brand is what they say about you when you're not in the room.
That's great. Mark, you want to talk a little bit about brand over beauty, which is a topic that when we were talking about how we're going to run this thing, we came up.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to explain. Again, this is kind of going back, being in these different spaces and seeing all the different kind of industries and all the different brands that are out there. It's been interesting to see how they've kind of evolved with that. And are we talking about mainly with messaging or just the overall looking? Yeah. So I have a library of the worst messaging or the worst and inauthentic messaging you can possibly imagine.
I bet it's a big library too.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. And I opened it up on a couple of social media and I asked people to send me which ones they were. And I mean, it's pretty funny. You can imagine I hate to say this, but if some of the creative agencies or the big agencies out there, if I actually put that up on LinkedIn, there would be some heads would roll, big time type thing. There's one luxury car company that had a surfboard sticking out of its sunroof on a beach in Malibu. And so, that's kind of like one extreme. But then there's ones that are brands that we work with on a day-to-day basis that you see and you just sit there and they're cringing. You cringeworthy that you see that. Kind of going back to also what you were mentioning too is brands feel like they can control their messaging, they can control their look, their feel, but ultimately at the end of the day, it is the consumer, it's the general public, and even more so today with social media that's going out there. So you have seen a lot of these brands get a massive backlash within seconds of a commercial going on TV, a print ad going out. They feel like they're doing right. Again, they feel like they're putting out a message that's timely, but within seconds, it's like there's the biggest boycott or backlash, or they're canceled or something along those lines. And then they realize that they lost it. They've lost who they are. They've lost their values. They've lost every asset or aspect of their brand. And it's going to take them tenfold in money and time and energy to gain that back, the trust back of their consumer.
I think one thing that happens, and I've seen this happen as someone who owns a company and hires on agencies, is creative people want to be creative, right? So if you come in and say, this is my brand and this is our messaging, go out and do, they're not gonna have a lot of fun with that. They wanna put their spin on it. And you let them do that, right, and it's not closely controlled, then you end up with something going out as far as a marketing campaign or a tagline that has nothing to do with anything that you would have said, and if you're not closely monitoring that. So I think part of the trick with, at least in my opinion, of working with agencies is coming in and saying, look, here's your left and right guardrail. I want you to be as creative as you can possibly be within this, but I don't want you to go off on a limb and say that we're the next hottest workwear brand, right? Or something like that that they see in you, but you may not necessarily want to be associated with. And it's a tricky one.
Good point. Excellent. So the next topic for us is, how does my company become authentic? And Mark, I see you smirking over there, so let's.
If they're asking that, isn't it too late?
Yes. Michael could definitely answer more to this question than I could, just because he has more experience when it comes to this. But exactly what you just said. If that question is coming up, it's too late. There's one brand that I've been working with lately, category leader at one time, legacy brand. A lot of you have probably worn them at one time, and they lost their way. They got bought out, they got shuffled around numerous times, and now they're kind of going back and creating that brand Bible that you were talking about, and trying to go back and talk to the original founder and find out everything that there could, the heritage, the true reason why the brand was started, and all the different nuances that made it so unique. And they're doing their best, and then their problem is like they want to now message that out to the world, but also they kind of forgot that they got to go back internally and talk about that within their own company. So whether it's the executives, the mid-tier, the guys that work in the warehouse, they're salespeople. And so they're going through this whole process right now where they feel like it's going to happen overnight, but it's going to take years to gain that back. There's like this whole new generation of people that didn't even know who the brand was, and those are who their consumers are now. So it's an interesting thing to see happen. We've also seen a lot in our industry where brands are now getting consolidated and bought up, and so what they were originally about is no longer a thing. I mean, we were talking about it at our table over here. There's some of the biggest brands in certain industries that we know are now turning into licensees or licensing companies. And you're going to start seeing them at Target and Kohl's and all this other stuff. And so there's going to be a big disconnect with that. And and I know, Michael, you've got way more to talk about.
I would just say, you listed off a bunch of words, integrity being one of them. Those are more like watchwords for a brand. That doesn't mean that they're authentic, because authenticity comes from spiritually being who you are and what you are. Those are just words that help you align with that authenticity. So they're descriptors, but they're not the actual authenticity. A couple years ago, I got hired to work with two companies. One's called Billabong. They had about 6 different brands that you've heard of if you're in the action sports industry, and Quicksilver. So the 2 biggest brands in the world, each with about 6 or 7 brands, they were merging. And they're like, Michael, so many of these brands compete with each other. So you've got 13 or 14 brands that are all going to be under the same umbrella. So the task was make sure that each brand doesn't cannibalize from what used to be its direct competitor. So recreating the brand authenticity for each of them so that they could sit underneath the same umbrella. What's amazing is you would go into a room, there'd be walls of flannel, and then there'd be a group of people that point at it and go, and this is how Luxottica does their eyewear. Okay, that's gonna be Ruka, that's gonna be Billabong. I think that one's Quicksilver, and that's how they were developing product. To me, that's as inauthentic as anything I'd ever witnessed. And now all of those brands, these core surf brands that were basically built out of the trunk of some surfer's vehicle, now reside with some huge company, and they're just gonna be cheap examples of what they used to be being commoditized, as inauthentic as possibly. But these are the things that happen in the life cycle of brands. So it's up to us to manage a brand, keep it core, and don't aspire to make more ugly black wrap sunglasses for men. Make things that matter to the world and be okay with just doing that because that's what feels good. Eventually selling out and having your baby become something that's commoditized doesn't feel good. It might feel good for the bank account, but spiritually, it's not aligned with your authentic self. Is that true, Mr. Authenticity?
I don't want that title. No.
He spent 10 years to trademark authenticity. I could not think of a more authentic person to be up on this authentic stage, and I can't believe that I'm monopolizing the microphone when you should be telling everyone what it's about.
We're going to have another workshop about how to trademark a word you never thought you could ever get. So we're going to be doing that later. We'll work on that. I'm a legal expert now, it feels like.
If those brands had their own, under the umbrella, if all 12 of those brands had their own marketing team and product development team, do you think you could retain that authenticity? Or is it the problem that you got one person managing product development for 4, doing social and branding for 4? Or
it's like you said, you hire a new artist who's going to be the champion of that brand's visual presentation, but they want to impart something of themselves, and that's where you lose it. In an ideal scenario, you have a creative director that really understands the brand essence and lives that brand Bible, and then you have a production artist that just does this, 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 and this. And eventually they matriculate on to do the creative part, but you gotta have somebody that owns that. But imagine cleaning house. Okay, now you're in charge of this brand and we're gonna tell you exactly how to do it. Again, it's not authentic, it's just a commodity.
You brought up a real good point there. In our industry, especially in the outdoor sportswear industries, people get recycled. They kind of move around from one brand to the next, and so they basically take the playbook from the brand that they were at and bring it to the next one. And we see it time and time again, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, that looks like brand X 2.0 at this place. And with a couple of copywriting changes and things along those lines, or a couple of little, the patches over here as opposed to this side or something like that. So it's really interesting. I mean, it's kind of like, it's almost like a cut and paste type of scenario in our industries.
If we can go off on a little bit of a tangent just for some giggles, in the action sports industry, there is this type of person, typically a male. The same thing in the cycling industry. We call them the fail forwards. So they had a job here, they did a terrible job, but somehow they were holding pictures of somebody and they were able to stay on until finally they just said, you're gone. That person goes to the next place, fails forward, does a terrible job there for a year. Over the course of 10 years, they're at 7 different places, yet they still get hired. It's like no one talks. Yeah, that guy's terrible. You should hire her. Like someone that's good and up and coming and capable. Same thing in the bike industry. There's these cancerous people that find their way through the industry and work at 10, 12 different companies. I don't know how we tolerate that, and why do we don't communicate with each other to say, yeah, that person's terrible. Or listening to the women's panel, like, this person is awesome. Go out of your way to get them hired. And we were talking about this. There's a company called Viore that's from our hometown. I don't know if you guys have heard of them, but one of the girls that worked with me at OP and then at Globe, she ended up getting a job there, but they couldn't pay her enough. So I was like, just take the stock and do that. She's the 4th employee there, and you may recall that recently they got a $400 million investment. Now they're a $4 billion company, and Nikki is rich. But it took somebody to say, this is the person you want to hire, not the fail-forward bro. Now I've talked too much. I'm sorry.
And she's the CMO.
Actually, let's keep the spotlight on you for a minute, Michael. Let's talk about how success can affect authenticity.
Well, I think I already touched on that, right? We do something because we love it. It's authentic to us, and it's an invention or it's an extension of us. Then this thing starts to grow and become unwieldy, and we can't keep track or have 11 direct reports because that's inefficient. And success then breeds this means through which a brand loses its essence or its ethos or its spiritual connection to its version of heaven. So success is the very thing that can detract from the brand's ultimate success, which is controlled curation of this beautiful idea that still manages to provide people a wonderful existence, a wonderful culture to live in and promote to the world that's better for the industry, it's better for the people, it's better for the brand, as opposed to pursuing this idea of selling ugly black wrap sunglasses for men. You got to stay away from that and stay true to who you are. That's this whole thing, right, Mr. Authenticity? I've known Mark since the 80s. So I can tease him. We've been in this industry. We've both failed forward more than anybody you've ever met in your life. And we tease each other about our consistent failures.
I'm curious your take on, you mentioned Patagonia. I think they just recently got #1 most trusted brand in the world. Beat Coca-Cola, beat everyone else. But they had a long period, and I don't know if everybody remembers this, or I wasn't around, but I know it from reading about it through the 80s and 90s, where they had a product line manager for every single possible sport in the whole world. They were bloated. They had too much inventory. They were making product for everybody. And now it's a different brand that you see now. So how does a brand that starts with climbing pitons in a garage go to bloated and oversaturated with products that don't really speak back to the brand and back to most trusted brand in the world with all the success? They're $1.5 billion.
I was a brand ambassador for them through a lot of that, and exactly what you said happened. So what happens is, here's this brand. We all know their ethos. We know what they're about. They're about having a business that's good for the planet. And what they would do is this practical idea that works in surfing or climbing, that could work over here too. And then you start to get away from the essential pursuits that you service because it works. But sometimes that doesn't work for the organization. And you have to claw it back and say, we're just going to focus on these things. Again, it comes back to focus on who you are and what you do, even though the practical application of the idea of doing a product that's better for the planet doesn't mean that it's better for the brand, because they might lose control of the very thing that matters to all of us more than anything.
Yeah, if you look at the Authentic 500 list, or Authenticity 500 list, I'm sorry, you will see that the top brands all had that exact same scenario happen. Whether it was Patagonia, you mentioned, Nike, Vans, you name
Apple.
it. Apple, yeah, they've all had that challenge throughout the years. They've had to do layoffs. They kind of got distracted and started doing products or went into categories that didn't make sense. What was the running joke? Bands did breakdancing at one time and aerobics, and they talk about how they just kind of went way off on the far end there because they thought that's what their consumer wanted. Apple did the same thing. All of them had done that, and so it's interesting to see how they all kind of come back to that original concept, the original ideas, the original thing what the brand is truly stated about, or what their values are. And it's doable. I think a lot of brands lose their way, though. When you look at all these other, we can tell you stories upon stories of brands that we've all worked with where we've seen them try, and they did get successful, and all of a sudden it just imploded everywhere. And then they get sold again.
So when that happens, you alienate the core audience, and then how do you win them back?
Methodically over time, you apologize repeatedly for failing forward. And it takes 2 or 3 years to win back some of those people with a very concerted, focused effort. Otherwise, it's a death of 1,000 paper cuts.
Do you remember what Domino's did like 10 years ago, or where they went out and said, we surveyed all of our customers and figured out that our pizza sucks?
Yeah.
And so we made it better, and now it's what it is today. And I'm not saying it's the pinnacle of pizza, but it is better than it used to be. And like they came out and said that.
I think they realized that it sucked, but they just decided to lower the price to $6 a pizza pie. So they played the commodity game. Well, we suck, but it's only $6.
So they got a vision statement of now sucks less.
Yeah, now sucks less, and it's priced appropriately. But
That's
I mean, I
a
do
great place
remember
to
those
be.
commercials. They're like, we surveyed and we figured out it's bad.
You know, it's a good point that you brought up. I think there's been brands that we've seen that happen, and they're, you know, going back to almost like the transparency side of things, like they admitted it. They just said, look, we screwed up. We made a big mistake. Here are the steps that we're going to do. Some of them did it in a tongue-in-cheek kind of a way, and, you know, people kind of laughed it off, and then, you know, they started coming back little by little. But yeah, it's interesting to see that, and I think more brands need to do that instead of letting their kind of like the PR spin kind of take over and try to do crisis control. Like, just admit it right up front and say, we are going to fix this, and we want to hear from you on how to do that.
That's a great place to leave this topic for the time being. What about each individual in this room has a personal brand? And what advice can you give them for developing themselves as a particular individual or particular personality? And Andrew, we can hear from you on that, I think.
I was really hoping to build on someone else's here. So, I mean, I guess I'll speak authentically on this because I don't have a prepared answer. So, I mean, the brand that I built and everything we talk about is really following in the footsteps of Patagonia and even trying to go beyond that in some ways. We're not busting dams, but we're trying to build an exceptional product that's good for the earth. Now, I have 2 kids that are under 4 and a wife, and we use paper plates sometimes because it's just too many dishes to do, right? We do all these things that you could look at and say, like, you know, that's inauthentic, but it's not. I mean, I'll get back to personal brand because this has just been on my mind, is that when it comes to sustainability, the most important anything, no individual action is ruining the earth that any individual is taking. It's companies, it's corporations, it's what they're doing out there that are driving waste. And so my personal view on that is that, look, the most impact I'm going to have in the entire world is how my company behaves, right? I need to support that. I'm an outdoors person. I'm an outdoorist. I do care about the environment, but every little thing that I do doesn't have to be LIVSN. I'm not on a reality TV show that's following me around. Now back to personal brand, like when I choose the things to put out into the world, when I choose to, you know, be public or the events to be a part of, those are going to fit. Those are going to fit within outdoor. Those are going to fit within outdoor adjacent, cycling, things that care about the things that I care about. But I do think that when it comes to the brand, to the company connection, there's a limit to how far you can put the pressure on yourself to be everything that your brand is. Right? Like you'll kill yourself. You'll become a meme of your company. And that can be really like emotionally and psychologically distraught.
If I could just add to that, because we're reversing that, thank you for that, is as a person, your personal brand, you can be a surfer and a skateboarder and a gravel racer and myriad things. But it's how you present yourself to the world. And it's kind of silly that we have to think about what we post and share with the world. But it's the prism through which and the spirit through which you share with the world those experiences. It's the words, it's the deferentialness, it's certain ways that you give yourself to the world that are a part of that personal brand. And there's a consistency there that is authentic. And so it doesn't mean that you can't also have the paper plates. Shame on you, by the way. But it's how you share these things with the world, or even if you apologize for those things. That's truly authentic. Like, I know I shouldn't do this, but I did this, and I'm just confessing right now.
Mark, you want to take the slide?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting times now because for a lot of us, when we were growing up, we didn't have social media. We didn't have all these different outlets. We didn't have these, this next generation that's out there. I feel like it's skewed on how they have to portray themselves out to the world, whether it's because they've seen reality shows, there's influencers, TikTok, they feel like they have to be a certain way and they have to portray themselves in a certain way. And likes are the most important thing, or views, or something along those lines. As us growing up, it was just, we had our close friends. We had the people we would talk to on the phone. We would meet them at the local pizza spot, or things like that. And they knew who we were, and we knew who they were. So it's interesting to see how people now, everyone thinks they have to have a brand. And, I blame Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V, and all those kind of guys that are out there and telling people, saying that you need to have a brand of yourself. You need to portray yourself in a certain way. And a lot of people polish who they are, or they kind of skew it in a way that they know that, like again, saying that they're going to get the most engagement that's out of it. And it's truly not who they are. And sadly, in this day and age, you're starting to see a lot of people that are affected by it. I know we talked about, there's mental health and a lot of these things. People are trying too hard to be something that they're not. And it's scary times. And I feel like people need to kind of there's those few people that are saying, stop, be who you truly are. You don't have to be this one person. You don't have to be something that you're not. And hopefully there's going to be that kind of cultural shift backwards to the good old days, as I like to call them. I joked around right before COVID. I spoke at some event, and someone asked me, what do you see will change all that? And I said, when Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok all suddenly shut down, and then 1 week later, COVID happened. So, I don't know if that will ever happen. I don't know if all these different kind of things will change, but we do need that kind of shift for us to get back to who we truly are.
I think that's a great place to leave it, and I know Sergio is back there. We want to be sensitive to timing on this, but maybe it's time to go to questions from the audience. Do you have anyone with a question?
You were mentioning, actually, I took your microphone. My name is Mercedes Ross. I'm with Project Bike Tech, and you were mentioning the companies that are the top 10. And you said something that was incredibly poignant to me, is that there was one person or one entity that was still driving that. Is that really true? Because yes, for Patagonia, but Nike and Vans, that's not really, so can you redefine that? It's not really a person, it's a...
No, that's true. No. I mean, it was just something we saw that was common among all of them, but definitely there are a lot of brands up there that are not necessarily that's the case. It was just interesting to see that, like the top three, it's kind of like you have Yvon Chouinard, you have Phil Knight, and then you have Paul Van Doren from Vans. And so that was an interesting aspect of it. But yeah, a number of the other brands are different with that. It definitely is an interesting see to have, having that one person that is that kind of visionary, the key leader, and then everything else kind of disseminates down from that. I think it kind of goes back to what we were kind of talking about, is maybe it's the executive level, the committees, a group of individuals within those companies that kind of create that. And every situation is going to be completely different. But it is interesting that I have seen, let's just say in the energy drink category, one brand, I had all their CEOs and executives call me up screaming at me because they were very far down down on the list, whereas the other one that is the category leader is up on the top, and they're like, look, we spend tons of money, we spend this and that, why are we so far down? And I'm sitting there going, I don't control the list. It's, the customers control the list, they're the ones that do this. So I've definitely had my battles when it's come to something along those lines.
So that's actually a great question that I wanted to ask you guys. Is this authenticity list is apparently voted on by consumers? It sounds like. I actually have never heard of it before, so it's an interesting concept. But how close do actual authenticity in these companies track with what consumers think is authentic? And do you think it's pretty close? Is it that authenticity is winning out, and those ones on the top 10 list are truly more authentic
Yeah, just so you know, there has been other lists over the years. There's actually like 3 or 4 other lists that have it. A lot of research companies do that, but they do a very small sample size. It's like, here's 1,000 people, and then they ask them, and they definitely do a deeper dive into asking these questions. Again, this is very subjective. We have a third party that verifies everything when we do these kind of things. I have had people question me. They're like, well, how do you define authenticity as a brand or a brand being authentic? And it's been interesting because, again, it's one of those things where people kind of pick out certain particular things. They'll say, well, this brand is authentic because they're sustainable practices. This brand is authentic because of DEI practices. This brand is because of their messaging or their products resonate with me. So it definitely is, again, like I said, it's very subjective and it's across the line. I've had people ask me, like, can you put how much their advertising or marketing spend is next to it? And that information is not kind of public in a lot of cases. A lot of people have asked me, what are their sales, to put that against that kind of thing too. So I think this is going to be something we're going to evolve, and we're going to ask and go deeper into these kind of questions and start finding out more and more, because a lot of people want to, again, this is something that people don't really think about that. You know, we were talking about the most trusted brand list and things like that. Again, that's another list where it's like a bit subjective when it comes to that kind of thing.
Curious what you say to brands who are sort of on the fence of the DEI issues, right? There's some who want to dive in, and there's some who are scared because they see what happened with like Budweiser's and Targets. And at Canberra, we saw a lot of organizations come in at the incident of George Floyd, and then quickly retreat when Target and Budweiser and larger brands had such a backlash, or what happened at the Supreme Court, right? So what do you say for brands who are trying to genuinely, authentically, right, embrace DEI but are scared? What advice would you have for them?
I think you're speaking about what's typically a PR thing, and the most authentic way to do that is to not have it be PR. People don't need to know what you're doing, but behind the scenes, you can be doing everything for inclusivity. You make it a central tenet of the organization. Every decision you make is related to creating those opportunities for diversity, equity. And if you just do that naturally, as you would live your life living by certain guidelines or principles, you don't need to broadcast that to the world. You don't need to have it be a post. Hey, look what we're doing. We're really inclusive now. That kind of, it's gross, and it's not a means through which you should be presenting yourself to the world. You should just be living in accord with those beliefs. That's how I would approach it, and have approached it.
I'll answer this a little bit, just because it's a topic of conversation around our company's table quite a bit. As you can probably tell, I'm a white male from the South, very privileged, right? And I started the company. The first hire I made was a female, but white middle-class person, and since we've been recruiting largely from this area of the country, our first 5 people, and we have 2 women and 3 men, but we're all white middle-class people, right? And we've actually tried. And we put the post out on Basecamp Outdoor Jobs. We put it on Outdoor Industry Jobs Network. We put it out nationwide every single time. And just the people that have been the #1 candidates, and the people that have been accessible and local and the best people for the job have ended up being who they are. And so, a few years ago, we're small, right? We're not worried about the public backlash like Target would be affecting our sales. It's not that big of a deal, but we have the earnest interest to be a part of this, to change that, to not be part of the problem, but be part of the solution. So when the George Floyd incident and everything around it happened, we posted the black square, right? Pat ourselves in the back. We went out and we found people of color and people to put in some of our messaging and marketing, and pretty soon after that, we were like, well, that didn't feel right. But we still struggle internally. We had this conversation about, is it still worth it? Like, to do that, to show that, it's having some sort of impact, even if it's not authentic, even if we're not, of a lower socioeconomic class or people of color or whatever. Is it helping a little bit to put out imagery in our industry of people that are? And we think that there's a little bit of value, but we also want to toe that line. So it's not an answer. It's just that this is a struggle for not only big companies, and we're not worried about PR backlash. We're just worried about doing the right thing, and we don't want to be seen as tokenizing.
I'll real quick answer on this one too. And we've talked about this yesterday. So my sister actually started the DEI initiative at Meta or Facebook. And this was years ago. She got Zuckerberg and all them on board to do that kind of stuff. And she's done this now numerous times in the tech industry. And she was telling me over the past 2 or 3 years, especially when George Floyd and everything came out, her phone was ringing off the hook. All of a sudden, all these companies that never even thought about this were suddenly jumping on and going, how do we change our practices? What do we do internally? Things along those lines. On the flip side, I have a number of friends who have their own organizations that represent different backgrounds, ethnicities, and things along those lines. A lot in the outdoor space, especially. Their phones were ringing off the hook from different brands going, oh, hey, we want to partner with you. We need this, we need that. We want to feature you in our ads. And they, you know, everyone was like a little hesitant, but they jumped on board and said, okay, we'll do it because you're giving light. You're shining a light on us. All of a sudden, within the past 6 months, they all are getting dropped because it is no longer an issue. It's no longer on, you know, in the pages or on the media, or, you know, people are talking about it on social media. And it's sad. It's really sad. It's kind of like, you know, companies jump in and out of this whole thing where they need to like take a practice of it. And that's why, you know, you and I were talking about this yesterday. I really applaud what Camber is doing and really changing a lot of these companies internally from the top down on these kind of thinking.
That's where it made me think something Michael said, and it's, can brands be authentic in these areas and also not spend money to tell people that they're being authentic? You know, does corporate greed get in the way of corporate governance and corporate speak?
I think we started with how important authenticity has become, and it's evidenced by those polls that it's the consumers that determine our authenticity. But I've been engaged by companies that are like, we need to do something that's green. You know, this is years ago. We need to be green. So then you get engaged with them to like create the world's greenest sunglass or the greenest pair of sandals ever. But it's a one-off greenwashing product where all the other product that company makes is toxic. It's made by people that aren't being paid enough money to do it. And the entire inauthenticity of that company is elucidated by the BS greenwashing that they're doing. And now as consumers, we just don't buy that. But there's still companies out there that try and greenwash or try and jump on the diversity bandwagon only to have it be an exercise in self-indulgence and nothing to do with the authenticity of the brand. And I think just now we're just more jaded to it in the world. We're just like, look at something of that doesn't make sense. That's BS. And it's actually that effort to engage with us backfires. Does that help, Brian?
I was going to mention on that one real quick. We posted up a clip of Yvon Chouinard calling out brands out there that are greenwashing. And he says, you know, our audience knows that we don't do that, but so many others in that space. And I didn't think anything of it when he did this talk or when he mentioned that quote, and we put it on like TikTok and everything like that, and it got like hundreds of thousands of views. And so people were commenting and resonating with it. So it is an interesting kind of like subject and topic, especially in our industry, especially when we're talking about the 25% reject of the products and factories and things along those lines the other day.
I would add on that, Yvon really worked on creating T-shirts that were the most ecologically friendly to the planet as part of the company ethos. And not only did he do that for his company, he went to a company called, I'm not sure you've heard of them, they're called Walmart. And he went to them to say, hey, look, this is what I'm doing. Let me give you all of my best practices. Let you too also, as the world's largest purveyor of T-shirts in the world, follow this practice so that the thing that I've worked on can be amplified by 1,000. That's authentic. When you're doing something for the good of everybody, not just your own selfish enterprise.
And that's still around. The Sustainable Apparel Coalition is what came out of that, and they came up with HIG, the HIG Index, which is the carbon measurement tool, and then HIG actually just split off from nonprofit to for-profit, and I forget the name of the new company, but either way, the legacy of that decision still is here, and we're using those tools now as a small company to measure.